Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
Hi, my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
If you haven't heard us before talk about the like button and the subscribe button and the bell icon, uh, I got nothing for you.
You mean to hit it. If you're new to this channel, each week, Todd Leonard and I take a moment to talk about the upcoming weekend's lectionary reading from the Gospels. Our goal is to talk about that passage in the context of love and inclusion and social justice. Our hope is that our conversation, our talking, will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something we say as we go back and forth between each other, something might inspire you alongside with us to do more than just talking. So, Todd, what are we looking at this week?
I was going to say, I don't know. I was going to say, I wanted to say, after you said something might inspire you to do something more than just talking, I was wanted to say, but I highly doubt it this week. Um, it's
This week is a challenging passage.
uh, because we're still in John 6.
How
John
much more can we
freaking
talk about the
6.
bread of life?
So yeah, John 6 verses 35, and then we go up to 41 through 51.
That's right. This is the passage where Jesus says, "Yeah, they ate the manna, but they died." That's frustrating to me because I love the manna story. You know what I mean? Like the manna story is where they learn the economic teachings or the economic justice lessons
Yeah.
back then. Those who gathered more than what they needed shared with those who gathered less than what they needed. And in the end, everybody had exactly enough. And if you tried to hoard it, whatever you
Yep.
hoard instead of shared, it turns rotten. I like the manna story. And here Jesus is like, manna shmanna. They all ate it and they died. Come
That's
eat
what
my
they
bread
should
of life.
That's what they should put in the heading for this section of John. Manna schmanna.
Manna shmanna.
Not right now it says Christ the bread of life, but yeah, manna schmanna.
Well, they could do both. Banish, manish, manna,
Yeah.
Christ the bread of
Obana
life.
schmanna.
Yeah. So again, I mean, I wrote a lot this week about the anti-Semitism in this chapter.
Those damn
Within the
Jews
Jews,
complaining about Jesus.
right, and how in the
Oh, by
Synoptics,
the way, Jesus was a Jew.
yeah, in the Synoptics, it's an in-house discussion. It's Jewish voices versus other Jewish voices. In John, it pits Christianity against Judaism. And anyway, I write a whole ton about that this week in the blog on renewedheartministries.com if you want to check that out. But yeah, what can we glean from this? Again, and it's just so prevalent. And we talk about this every time we've talked about John. We've warned about this, but man, it is so concentrated here in John 6. And I don't understand why in the lectionary we're spending 4 weeks in John 6. But John 6 is all about minimizing the material world, like the bread that actually feeds hungry people, the bread that actually could end world hunger, and minimizes literal bread and lifts up this spiritualizes it and lifts it up as being greater than the material.
Yeah.
Um, Todd, can you redeem? Is there anything you can share to redeem this week's passage?
I mean, I can I can become what so many great preachers have done before me, which is I can twist this around to make it say something that it's not saying but can fit my theology.
Well, let me ask
Um,
you this. How do I say this? Okay, so So I make a strong argument this week in my blog
Hmm.
that when we focus on the afterlife and we turn Jesus's gospel into only giving us post-mortem assurance,
Yes.
that's just a way for humanity, a way that humanity has found to manage their fear of dying, their fear of death. It's a way for them to deal with the fact that we're all going to die. Is we
Yes.
change death into a portal that it's a transition, right?
Yes.
So,
Right.
but when the gospel is only about death management, when it's only about death
Hmm.
management,
Hmm.
it becomes pretty death dealing very quickly because it's only about an afterlife. Where in the
Yes.
synoptics, the gospel of Jesus is all about not what happens when you die, but how to show up in
How
the
do we?
world, how to live while you're alive, right?
Right, and how to overcome uh, the these the the things that bring about premature suffering and death for and unjust suffering and death for people in this current life,
Hmm.
not not the not the natural occurring death that happens to
Right.
all life at some point,
Whether you're
but
standing
the
up for justice or not.
correct, but the one that where, for example, uh, something that still happens in our country is the disparity between uh, white women dying in childbirth versus people of color dying in childbirth or something like that. How do you solve that white women are less likely to die in childbirth and people of color are going to die in childbirth? That how do you
That's a
that's
totally
not
different. Yes.
that's not addressing issues of will they go to heaven when they die. That's addressing how can we make sure that a person of color can live a full life here in this world, just like a white person is more likely to do so in this world.
So I
So,
share I share all of that trajectory to say to ask. I don't know that I'm asking you to twist this week's passage to match a certain theology as much as I
mhm.
am. Is there a way to take it out of the death dealing, death management, and make it life giving? Is there some way to twist it, even if it's not what the original author intended? Is there a way to interpret and apply this passage on Jesus being the bread of life in a way that could be life giving for us today, in the here and now, not just giving us post mortem assurance, but in the here and now?
Yeah, I mean, we'll work with this, and I mean, and my and I mean, you know me, Herb, and so I like to be irreverent about this stuff. So when I was saying I'm twisting stuff around, I mean,
We
a
always interpret things according to our own theology, so I'm not poo
uh,
pooing that.
yes. So I mean, somebody who's a biblical scholar could poke holes in could poke holes in this, but there's this is I don't think this is an unreasonable stretch. So if you're going to look at John 6:51, Jesus says, "I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever, and the bread that I will give for the life of the world is my flesh." If you so for example, this I am the living bread, and this living forever. There is this idea that um, that Christ, that Jesus, when you have an understanding of who Jesus was and what he was about and what his mission in the world was about, and for you and me, this is clear. His mission is clearest to us when we read it in the synoptics, um, about freeing oppressed peoples and relieving suffering of those who are unjustly burdened with the difficulties of this world, um, and giving everybody uh, uh, equal access to the blessings of God. Um, that when you understand that that's what the mission of Jesus was, and you want to join in that mission, and you get to participate in the mission of Jesus, that you find a a a zeal for life, a purpose for your existence, a a thing that gets you out of bed in the morning, to that drives how you order and structure your life, that that goes beyond earning lots of money, that goes beyond getting fame and fortune, that goes beyond getting a house in a gated community. There's something more about finding solidarity and community with those on the margins, and connecting with them and walking with them towards a more just future for them. That that you
You're
see
talking
in
about
G.
engaging social justice work in our local communities or in
Yes,
our fellowships.
yes. That there is this bond and um, camaraderie that is found, that you see Jesus had with with his brothers and sisters on the margins, that sustained him. I think of, um, ironically, the story of Jesus and the woman at the well in John, where the disciples asked if Jesus had eaten anything, and he says, I have bread to eat, or I have food to eat that you know nothing of. That there was this drive to minister to this
Mm.
marginalized woman was was sustaining him. It was what was the mission of his life. And um, and so I think we can say that that there really, this, I think I can say for my life, I think Herb, you can say for your life, when you discovered, I mean, I think this is the heart of your recent book, Finding Jesus. This changed, fundamentally changed who you were and what your life was about. Um,
Yeah, it
and
was
I, and
definitely
I,
bread of life type stuff.
yeah,
Not giving me eternal life, but giving me purpose and meaning and
in the
focus and
present,
direction
in the
in this
present
life.
life,
Yeah, in the present
and
life.
uh, and certainly did not result in prosperity for you. Did not result in greater fame for you. But there was something more core to who you were, that you were shaped
Mm.
by this understanding of who Jesus was and what Jesus was about. And then the other thing where it says, and when he says, "I'm whoever eats this bread will live forever." Uh, Again, now I don't know the original language word for forever here, but I do know that there is usage of the word where eternal life is used in some places. The idea of the eternal life or forever life has more of a qualitative nature to it than quantitative, in the sense that when you enter into this life of God, it is something that is can be experienced in the now, as you are experiencing the God life. Is more about experiencing the God life as in the here and now, as much as quantitatively entering into a never-ending existence, into a heavenly realm. And so I think you can take that language from John 6:51, and you can very much bring it into a very present, God soaked reality and sustaining meaning for our lives today, without totally going rogue with the passage.
Sure. So the bread of life could be about encountering again the Jesus that we do in the synoptics in such a way that it invites us to participate with him in the work of ending oppression now, ending injustice now, ending violence, standing up to violence now, those types of engagements in the here and now, and how that, it's exhausting to do justice work, but there's also something about it that's very feeding, that's very fulfilling, that's very, it's like it does give life, like bread does literally. Um, it can sustain you.
And
Um,
there's something about it too that once you've tasted it, as like you said, as difficult as it is, as exhausting as it is, you also start to find out there's nothing else that is
yeah, it
that
really does.
nothing else will fill you like it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, we're gonna have to do something with John 6, Todd, because I just looked while you were talking. I was listening at the same time and just want to
Sure,
get
sure,
that on record. I want that on
sure,
record.
sure.
But I looked. We don't get back. That's a great cat meow.
Do you
You
like
got,
my
yeah,
cats are eating their supper next to me right now. I apologize for the
that's great.
distraction.
So we don't get back to the Gospel of Mark. We don't get out of John 6 until the first weekend of September. We're in John 6 for until the last week of August, basically. The last week of August, we'll be talking about Mark 7. I thought we had one more week. I think we have at least two more.
I think you can handle this show on your own, Herb, until we get to September. You just go ahead. I'll see you in September.
Yeah. Well, I do want to talk. Wow.
No, go ahead. There's stuff to talk about, man. I mean, this is. I mean, contrasting the present and the future kingdoms. I mean, there's other stuff I can bring up. I mean, even a conversation I had with my chaplains today. I mean, there's just kind of that, just the whole shit, the worldview difference. So, I mean, go ahead. I know you're go dive into what you're talking about.
Well, no, I was just thinking that in the same spirit of contrasting the two approaches, and we've talked about this before. Um, the bread of life that focuses on afterlife, living forever quantitatively. Had to make sure I was using the right word. Quantitatively, um, that's a very popular form of Christianity that's promoted mostly by those in power. And I was processing that this week, and I was reminded of the statement by Howard Thurman in Jesus and the Disinherited. And I don't have a slide this week, but I am going to read it. And this is on page 14. He says, the opposition to those who work for social change. And that's what I think you were talking about when we're working for social change, how that's life giving, that's bread of life type stuff. Those who work for social change does not come only from those who are the guarantors of the status quo. Again and again, it has been demonstrated that the lines are held by those who hold on uh, whose hold on security is sure as long as the status quo remains intact. So there's a status quo, right, that benefits some and doesn't benefit others. Jesus's
Right.
status quo, Jesus's kingdom was about, you know, everybody having enough, everybody having what they need to thrive, right? But some people have found a way to navigate the status quo in such a way that even though they're not at the top, they've at least got some stability and security and some guarantee that they're going to survive. Right. So that's what Thurman's saying, is that they could be um, just as much part of the pushback for change as those who are ultimately benefiting from the way things are presently.
Right.
Um, and I was just reminded as I read that here we are talking about Jesus only, and over and over again in John, this is what he's presented as, is that Jesus is only really trying to get people to embrace him so that they live forever. And honestly, Todd, if that's what Jesus was about, if the Gospel of John is right on that version of Jesus, contrasted with Mark's and Matthew's and Luke's. Why on earth? How did Jesus get crucified? How did John the Baptist
Yeah.
get beheaded? If you're not challenging the present, if you're not challenging the
Right.
status quo, if all you're doing is giving people bread of life and defining it as post-mortem assurance, you're just passing out tickets to heaven, giving
Yeah. Who
people
doesn't want
assurance of
that?
an
Who
afterlife.
doesn't want to get into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory?
Exactly. I mean, everybody, indigenous populations probably don't, but everybody,
Oh, right. So thank you.
yeah, anyway, the nobody gets crucified or beheaded for giving people
No.
post-mortem assurance.
No.
So again, John sets itself up, and it's a quandary that I have with the Gospel of John. In the synoptics, the reason Jesus is crucified, the straw that breaks the camel's back, is uh, uh, the the cleansing of the temple, the overturning of the money
Mm-hmm.
changers' tables.
Mm-hmm.
That's when they finally had enough, and Jesus has to be taken care of. He's overstepped a
Mm-hmm.
bound. He's transgressed. He's stepped over the line too far. Now he has to be taken out. In John, the cleansing of the sanctuary is at the beginning of the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
And what gets Jesus crucified in the end is his resurrecting of Lazarus
Mm-hmm.
and giving people hope beyond death. And
Right.
that doesn't make sense to me
It
because
doesn't make sense.
most religions give assurance, in some sense, of an
Mm-hmm.
afterlife. Most, not all, most. And state
Resurrection and afterlife in that time already was very common. This is not.
and
Yeah. This
states
is
don't get
not.
threatened by that. States usually
No.
support religions that teach
Of
that.
course.
So why does the
They
Jesus story
created it for their emperors.
exactly exactly? So how does Jesus get on a cross in the Gospel of John other than divine orchestration for opening up the portals of death so that you can pass through them now? I mean, that's what it accomplishes in the Gospel of John, but how did he even get there narratively? It doesn't make any
Right.
sense why Jesus would be put on a cross.
Right.
You got to
Right.
jump through major hoops.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah,
that's 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 the mystery of God, Herb. That's why
thanks.
that's for
It's a
gospel of
mystery.
the world that He gave His only Son. This is where faith comes in.
Never told you how much
Um,
I love it when things don't make sense and the pastor just says, well, it's a mystery. I love that so
that's
much.
I know, I know. This is
It's my favorite. So, for those of you watching, here we are once again grappling with the Gospel of John this week. Again, Jesus is belittling here. Yeah, manna. They ate the manna, which is an incredible miracle to feed all those hungry people, to keep them alive, the material needs, feeding of the multitudes. I mean, I could say, if I'm going to use the same logic, Todd,
yes,
I could say, oh, so Jesus fed the multitudes with the loaves and fishes? Eh, all those people who ate that day died.
right.
Can we do the same thing with the manna story that we do with
That's right.
you can apply the same logic,
That's right.
which is
And
kind of what he's doing here. I mean, this chapter starts off with the feeding of the multitude and says, you're searching for bread that passes away, the bread that you'll still be hungry. Yes, all this manna stuff. Let me give you the bread that'll help you live
yeah,
forever.
that's right. Really not concerned about this stuff. Let's draw a straight line. Man, boy, I it I am. It is interesting to me. I'm trying to learn not to get angry. I'm trying to learn not to allow this emotion to rise up.
I
Uh,
know you're not a Star Wars fan, but anger leads to the dark side.
I see, and that's no, it's exactly right. I'm wanting to channel I'm wanting to channel awareness towards action rather than allowing it to, so, but it's just interesting. It's just interesting when these thoughts come, it stirs up. This is just me working in my own stuff. Anyway, um, my governor, um,
In
I mentioned this
Louisiana.
just, yes, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. Um, was offered free money to help with summer school lunch programs for kids. So was your governor.
Wouldn't that be
Okay,
great?
to help make sure they had enough food. And they turned down free money from the federal
Oh, of
government to
course they
help with
did.
their state's summer food program. And so uh, that fits with the Gospel of John. This is not this food that spoils is not what is most important. But what is most important is what my governor also did, which is signed into law that the Ten Commandments shall be posted in every classroom
Yeah,
in the
that's the same
state.
stuff. That's a great application. Yeah.
And he said, after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, he said, my hope would be that if these Ten Commandments had been posted in the classrooms where that shooter attended school,
Oh my goodness.
that perhaps he wouldn't have attempted to kill the former president.
Yeah.
Because it's about the spiritual bread, not the literal bread.
Who cares about food deserts in Louisiana and children who need lunch during the summer break?
40% of the hospitals in Louisiana are in danger of closing right now.
Wow.
I'm just learning horrific things about my new home state. Anyway, it's just this is the thing is, but it comes but this is the thing, man. Is what you and I have been trying to say is this stuff doesn't come out of a vacuum.
No,
This
no.
stuff
It comes out of a
flows from
form of
things.
Christianity. Exactly.
And it's not just politics. There's theology tied to this. This is you can track this stuff theologically right out of the culture in which we live. This is theologically based.
We are taught within our Christian religion to, and not everybody, I know there are exceptions to this, but to a large degree, we're taught to value the spiritual and devalue the material with the kind of language that we're reading this week. This is a great segue for a statement that I also encountered this week thinking about all this from Walter Rauschenbusch. Um, he was a key figure. For those of you who aren't familiar with Walter's work, he was a key figure in the social gospel movement in the early 20th century. And again, the social gospel movement didn't cross all the T's, didn't dot all the I's. Matter of fact, they were woefully silent on matters of, while they were talking about economic justice, they were silent on issues of racial justice and other issues. Today, our justice work needs to include not just racial justice, but also women's rights, LGBTQ rights, so many more different justice issues. It's a lot larger than just economic justice. But still, he makes the for those of you who are like Todd and I, you're wrestling with this um, maybe old way of viewing the teachings of Jesus as about just to get to heaven versus a newer way of, a new to you maybe, or new to us way of reading Jesus, where he's actually engaging and seeking to bring about the kingdom change in the here and now. Rauschenbusch, he writes, this is from A Theology of the Social Gospel. He writes, the old message of salvation, um, This is simply the old message of salvation, but enlarged and intensified. The individualistic gospel has taught us to see the sinfulness of every human heart and has inspired us with faith in the willingness and power of God to save every soul that comes to him. But it has not given us an adequate understanding of the sinfulness of the social order. So that's what you're talking about, Todd, is not the individual sin. Here's a social sin where we're failing to feed hungry kids
Mm.
in favor of putting in 10 commandments, or we're failing our medical system. Social sin, so sinfulness of the social order, and its share in the sins of all individuals within it. It has not evoked faith in the will and the power of God to redeem the permanent institutions of human society from their inherent guilt of oppression and extortion. Both our sense of sin and our faith in salvation have fallen short of the realities under its teachings. The social gospel seeks to bring humans under repentance for their collective sins
Mm.
and to create a more sensitive, more modern conscience. It calls on us for the faith of the old prophets who believed in the salvation of nations. So, not
Mm.
just individual sin, but so what you're describing, when we're more concerned with making sure each classroom has a copy of the Ten Commandments, but we're not concerned with free lunch in the cafeteria, or lunches being provided for some during the summertime for hungry children. That's a social sin. That's a social failure
Mm.
of omission.
Yep.
Um, and we don't have it. We're currently the bread of life theology in John 6 doesn't give us a theology to grapple with that. We look at
No.
that and say, again, manna shmana.
Right.
School lunch, shmoo lunch. Doesn't matter. It's all about the real bread. We should be giving
Yep.
people the real bread.
Mm-hmm.
Where the gospel has to have a social dimension as well. It's not just about the saving of souls, but the salvation of nations, and the salvation. Jesus brought salvation to people's bodies too, that were hungry, that were
Yeah.
broken. That, you know what I mean. That he brought healing. So, but again, that's synoptic gospel Jesus.
Right.
I mean, there are some healing stories in John for sure.
But always, but the again, and even, but just like in this passage where he does perform the feeding of the loaves, the giving people, or the feeding of the 5,000, it sets up him teaching a spiritual lesson that when he's doing these things, um, he's he's teaching something more important than physical healing or physical. It's always these physical events are never about just solving physical problems in the here and now. They're about setting up a greater spiritual truth, a
They're kind
greater.
of like setting up the
Yeah.
volleyball for the spiritual spike.
Correct.
They're just a
Correct.
means to an end, which is what you were talking about
Yes.
last week. That
Yeah,
even
we
when
we
churches
we touched on
do,
this last week. Yep.
yeah, that even when churches do talk about the material, it's just to get leads for their evangelistic series.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, so if you're watching this channel, you're watching this show, we're in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, for the next 2 weeks. You have our permission to check back with us first weekend of September for last week of August, if you would like. But Todd and I are going to we'll be here next week. We'll be here the week after that. We're going to keep slugging through and see, as we finish John chapter 6, what life giving lessons we can pull out of that chapter in spite of itself.
What are you and I accomplishing by tying ourselves to the lectionary like this? Or are we earning favor with God in some way? Are we accomplishing some great spiritual feat by
Yeah, no, that's
are
not
we are
what
we
it's
to be
about.
applauded in some way for
For what is this, the cat and I? What is this, the
self-flagellation?
right?
Yes, self-flagellating ourselves with the Gospel of John.
No, but there is a large sector of Christianity where clergy and church congregations,
They're stuck with this.
they follow the lectionary.
I know. I
and
know. So we're trying
and
to help them,
I
and we're
think,
we're doing such a great job.
well, at least at least they know they're not alone this week, Todd. We're grappling with it too.
Okay.
But you know what? If you teach from the lectionary each week, um, the
And again,
lectionary isn't
we've
written,
said
it
it.
isn't in stone. You know what I mean? You can maybe take a break and go to a different passage. Just break from the lectionary for 1 or 2 weeks.
Yeah, hit some of those good Old Testament passages, or
Yeah,
but
you do have permission to do that.
and we've said this to her. You and I, your and my take on John is not. People don't have to take our word for what John
No,
says. I mean, you can, like we have said, if you if you take John's spiritual approach to what he says about Jesus and understand that and understand that and believe that Jesus is the teachings that Jesus gives here about the ultimate afterlife, and that is a crucial component part of the Christian faith story, that's fine as long as you are able to balance it with the synoptics accounts
sure.
of what Jesus says. That you and I are attempting to balance out what we feel, where we feel the Christian church is heavily focused on just John's and Paul's uh, gospel interpretation of the Jesus story. And so for us, really bringing in the synoptics is important. Uh, so
That's what
if for
resonates with us,
you,
but we're not everybody. And some people may really love John.
yeah. So I mean, just forgive us for
If you really like John, you got 2 more weeks in it. Knock yourself out.
yeah, and so God bless you. We wish you all the best. Because listen, and for me, who I've been out of church pastoral ministry for about 11 months now, um, my heart is still with those of y'all who are doing the pulpit every week. It's it's important work and it's hard work, and so what you do to try to connect people with the divine story in 2024 is important work. So God bless you in that.
Yeah. And let me just give a soundbite out. I agree with that completely. Just affirmation to anyone who's wrestling with this in ministry and still trying to do good in the world. Um, but you next week, okay, so this is just maybe this isn't a commercial for next week's episode.
Oh,
You
ooh,
have permission to check back in with us last week of August, beginning of September, if you're done with John. But next week, so the Eucharist isn't mentioned in the Gospel of John. Like the blessing of the cup and the breaking of the bread, it's in Mark, it's in Matthew, it's in Luke. You get to John,
ironically.
and ironically, it's absent. The only thing that's in John is the foot washing, which isn't in any of the other versions of the
Mm-hmm.
Jesus story in the New Testament, right? It trades out the foot washing for the. But next week's passage is John 6:51 through 58, where whoever wrote John still gave kind of a nod to the Eucharist, um, saying anyone who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life. My what does it say? Eats my flesh, drinks my blood, feeds on me, will live. He's the bread that came down from heaven. That his body is the bread and his blood is the what we're supposed to drink. It's the nod to the Eucharist. It's the nod to the
Mm.
actual ceremony that's in the other gospels that's strangely absent from John's gospel. So what I would love to do next week, Todd, is maybe talk a little bit more about the history of the evolution
Yeah,
of the
I think
Eucharist
that would
and
be
how
great.
it's.
We started talking about that a couple weeks ago, and I think that would be. I think there's a lot there. I think that we could continue to unpack. I agree with you for
So
sure.
next week's passage may have some meat to it that we can glean from. But that is such interesting history to me, as the social location of the church changed how the Eucharist changed from being a communal meal to make sure hungry people were being
Mm-hmm.
fed once again, real bread, to being these symbols that were now
Mm-hmm.
something, we're so much so that Paul says if you show up hungry, you should have eaten at home.
Right.
You know, but anyway, that's First Corinthians 11, I think. So anyway, we're going to let's talk about the evolution of the Eucharist next week, where it
Okay.
started, what it grew into, and maybe how we can take it back to some of those early roots.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
That works.
so there may be something still good in John chapter 6.
Okay.
Just have to wait till next week. For this week, John tells you, manna. They ate the
Manishmana.
manna and they died. Yeah. Best of luck to everyone with that one.
And Herb would like to thank you for supporting Renewed Heart Ministries. You can
I
find
would.
all his resources are right there at renewedheartministries.com.
They're all
You
free.
get they're all free. Blog, podcast. Uh, you can sign up for a newsletter, both an e-newsletter, and you can get on his mailing list for a hard copy newsletter. And there's just, I mean, good grief, how many years have you been putting stuff? I mean, you can go back in archives for years and years. I mean, there's just so much stuff there.
2007 is when the Renewed Heart Ministry started.
Lord
I
have
think,
mercy, there's just a lot of stuff there.
yeah, I think about 12 years ago, we took a hard turn towards uh, the intersection of faith and social justice. So 12 years worth of
Yeah,
materials there.
that's great.
So yeah, all kinds of
So,
stuff on there. You can get lost for hours.
yeah. And there's also a donate button there if you appreciate what we do here or appreciate the other work that Herb does. Thank you for supporting Renewed Heart Ministries. And with that, we will bid you adieu, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for watching, everyone.